Happy Advent. Our Catechism in the Catholic Church in paragraph 524 states that when the Church celebrates the liturgy of Advent, she is participating in that ancient desire for the coming of the Messiah. And in participating in this long anticipation, she anticipates with a renewed ardor the coming of Christ in glory. And so this is a season to sort of stoke our anticipation, our desire, our longing for the coming of the Lord, for he has come. And we will celebrate that coming at Christmas. And he is present, and he will come again in glory at the end of time. Now, paragraph 524 goes on to say that in celebrating the life of the precursor, that is John the Baptist, and celebrating his birth and martyrdom, she unites herself to his desire, to the Baptist's desire that Christ must increase, but I must decrease. And so this is the spiritual work that we are about in this season, a season that really sets the tone for the whole year. At the beginning of this new liturgical year, we begin a new gospel. Last year we were studying the Gospel of Luke. This year we begin the Gospel of Matthew. Now we don't begin at the beginning. We begin at the Olivet discourse, that discourse of our Lord on Mount Olive, where he speaks about the end times. Two men are working in the field. One is taken, one is left. Two women grinding at the mill. One is taken and one is left. Now, some people today hear those words and they automatically assume that he's talking about the rapture. That those faithful disciples will be taken up into the clouds and so many will be left behind for a period of tribulation. But the reality is, Jesus is speaking in this passage very specifically about the end times, about his final coming in glory. He says it specifically, when the Son of Man comes. We know this also by the context of the passage. Lord, when will all of these things take place? We're told in the passage before. And Jesus says that only the Father knows, not even the angels, the coming of the glory of God. We also know it by the contrast Jesus uses in this passage, like in the days of Noah. Some people were taken into the ark. Did the others keep on living and going about their business, not paying any attention to God? No, it was a cosmic judgment, the flood. And that's what the end of time will be like, a judgment. We also know this because in the immediately following chapter 25, we have the judgment scene where the sheep and the goats are separated. The sheep to live in eternal glory with the Father, with God. And the goats to go to that place of destruction with the evil one and his fallen angels. And so what we're speaking about is the final advent of Christ, his coming in glory. And the impetus of the gospel is that we need to be prepared. We need to know that it's coming. We need to be awake. We need to wake from our slumber. The fact that the church celebrates at the beginning of this Advent, his second Advent, his coming in glory, is also pointed to in our first reading today from the prophet Isaiah, not one of the later chapters in which we hear the stories of the servant of Israel, the suffering servant, or the anointed one who comes to proclaim glad tidings to the poor. That will come later. That's part of the first coming. But today we hear a passage from the second chapter of Isaiah where he speaks about the end times, the latter days, when Mount Zion will be the highest of the mountains. We know that it's not now, but it will be exalted. There will be a new Jerusalem, a time of peace, a time where swords will beat into plowshares and spearing hooks into pruning hooks. A time of peace among nations. There will be no more war. We're talking about the new heavens and the new earth. And we anticipate these things with great joy. And so this season we look to the past, to his first coming, and to the future coming of the Lord in glory. And we are reminded that we need to be prepared. St. Paul in the letter to the Romans, chapter 13, 11 and on, speaks about our need to cast out the works of darkness and to armor ourselves in light, to clothe ourselves in light. This is the same theme that St. Paul was speaking about last weekend when we talked about Christ the King and how we have to switch our allegiance from that domain of darkness to that domain of light. We know the time that St. Paul is speaking about. We find ourselves in the latter days. We find ourselves in the final age between the first advent and the second advent of Christ. Now is the time to prepare our hearts joyfully for his victory in his coming in glory. And so as we begin this Advent retreat together, let us prepare ourselves. We do so with joy, for we know the victory has been won. Whose side am I on? That's the question. But the victory has been won. And so in this penitential season, we also recognize that we are to die to our former selves. This is the attitude of the church as we go through this season and the Christmas season and the seasons to come. With joyful anticipation, but prepared for the coming of the Lord.